Okay. All righty. Well, everybody out there in the wide world, welcome. Welcome back to a live stream of This Week in Drones. It has been a minute, in fact, a couple months since we've been here live with you. We've missed you, and a lot has transpired in the industry, of course. I know myself personally, I need to just sit back, take a little hiatus, observe, and to see where the lines are going to fall on some things, big legislative matters that we've all been waiting for and hoping for, right? From like mitigation authorities for counter UAS. Can we do something about that drone when we see it over our electric utility? Like, right, we've talked a lot about that, and there's been a lot of movement there in legislation, all the way to the other side of like drone delivery and what is this whole airspace awareness, data services? What is that going to look like? How are we going to implement drones flying all over the place over our skies in a way that's safe, that's manageable, that is interoperable, Michelle, that works? Anyways, those are the two, at least in my head, right? The way I look at it, those two sides of the coin. So much has happened. We're going to get into a little bit of it today, but between myself, Max, Josh, Michelle, it's been a minute. So I wanted to get us back together, kick off the year, kick off the podcast. The intention is to continue forward weekly and have guests as we have last year, just different voices in the industry, so we can deep dive and we can like solve through some of these things. Look for the silver linings. Hopefully by the end of these conversations, everyone out there, we have some takeaways, some things that are practical, whether you're an end user, an agency out there that's trying to implement, or whether you're a manufacturer of a product or a consultant or whatever role you play. Hopefully there's like some good solid meeting and takeaways. Anyways, with that said, I guess I'll pass it around the horn and we'll just do, like, Michelle, I thought you had a great idea backstage, which was just kind of like, let's catch up just for a minute on like, where are you at? What are the big things you're seeing right now? I know that could be those could each be entire hour conversations, but just, if you want to throw out a couple things, each of us, and then, we have a couple topics I wanted to maybe hit on, second half. But with that said, I'll kick it over to Michelle. How are you doing? I know I saw you in person in Williamsburg, which was wonderful, but feel free to just catch us up on where you're at, what you're up to, and what you're seeing in the industry.
All right. Well, first, it was really great to see you down in Williamsburg. I feel like it's been way too long. We went to talking all the time to taking a little break, and yeah, I kind of missed you, dude. I have been very busy. Everything is good. Um, I am I am learning who I want to be when I grow up. Right, this whole consulting gig. I'm now a year into it, and I am learning and refining and sharpening how valuable I can be to various types of people, and it's been very good. It's a great learning experience. Um, Things got a little sideways for me when the activities in the Middle East started. For many of you, you guys know that my wife is deployed, and she is there, and so she's been extended, and that's unclear of when she's coming back. And my travel has been kicking up, and so it has been an interesting juggle of how to manage the dogs in the house and the families and multiple families, and keep everything moving forward positively while our industry is growing like gangbusters now. Um, we have a whole lot more maturity this year than we did last year, even. And last year was a big leap in drone maturity. But now we've got this massive emphasis on building our industrial base. And now we've got all kinds of other countries, Ukraine being one, who want to have a footprint in the United States to bring their manufacturing expertise here. How do we fit all of that in with what we've already constructed. We've got this whole UTM mindset and how we're building the low altitude airspace infrastructure. And we've got our brand new ATC system. So how are we going to revision and re-architect the legacy architecture of our NAS? These are all massive questions. And oh, by the way, we have FIFA and we're going to have the Olympics. And as you alluded to, we've got counter UAS authority needs at boots on the ground level. What does that look like? So it's spooling up to be a very interesting year for drones. We also have the electronic integrated pilot program that I'm involved in with one of my other hats, and that just got released and is kicking off. So we have a lot to do. We're going to have a lot to talk about this year. I'm really excited to get going.
That's good. Well, appreciate what you and your wife are doing as well. We'll keep you guys in the thoughts and prayers for sure.
Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, man, so many huge movements in the industry. Josh, do you want to just throw in kind of where you're at, what you're up to, what's on your mind, and then we'll end with Max. And then Max, if you want to kind of, after you share for a minute, hit some of the legislative topics that take us a little bit more into the conversation, that would be awesome. But yeah, Josh, good to see you.
Yeah, good to be back. I know last year we covered quite a few topics about mitigation was kind of a big hub for at least on the Tuesday side of the show. And we kind of had a lot of different ideas of how it might turn out. So it's really fascinating seeing how mitigation's getting rolled out, through this training school in Huntsville, and now having the state and local police being able to potentially mitigate drones once they've gone through the training, and what technologies will be allowed. And you've seen a lot of, when you look at mitigation, what kind of technology they're comfortable with. A lot of them tend to be more comfortable with the cyber takeover systems versus kinetic mitigation systems. So interesting seeing how all of that's kind of starting to roll out now that mitigation authorities kind of slowly starting to trickle out. So very exciting to see kind of the things that we talked about last year starting to come to fruition a little bit. Also, just with some of the changes with the FAA, kind of their regulations around low altitude awareness, and tying that up a little bit after that crash in DC that we covered a little bit early in the year where the helicopter ran into the passenger airplane. So just interesting seeing how all of those different events from last year really starting to coalesce and really get some action behind it this year. And I think last year, the biggest thing was, when are we going to actually take movement? When are we going to take action? What's it going to take to actually move the ball forward? So it's interesting. I'm very happy to see that it's being moved forward without there being a catastrophic event, at least as far as the counter drone side of things go. There's been a lot of movement really with FIFA being that focal point. Instead of having a really negative event, we have a positive event with FIFA being that catalyst that's driven forward a lot of this policy change. So it's really exciting to see that positive momentum and all the things that Michelle and David and Max have been talking about for years and years have finally started to coalesce. So it's very exciting to be in this industry right now. And Max, I'll let you take it off.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's already been a pretty busy first couple of months of 2026. I know we're approaching the end of the first quarter here, and there's been no shortage of activity, both on the congressional side and on the regulatory side, on issues related to our industry. And some of the notable ones, which I think we'll dig a little deeper on some of these later on in the discussion, but Secretary Noem was ousted as DHS secretary, which came after testimony that she gave on Capitol Hill, which I think a lot of DC insiders weren't super surprised about. I think that was a move that a lot of folks sort of inside the Beltway and inside that world saw coming. And as everyone knows, Senator Mark Wayne Mullen was nominated by the president to be the next Secretary of Homeland Security. And he went through his confirmation hearing process this week and then was just advanced out of the Senate Homeland Security Committee this morning. And very interestingly, he advanced only by one vote. And the chairman of the committee, Rand Paul, voted against advancing him to the full Senate. But Senator John Fetterman, who's a Democrat from Pennsylvania, voted for him. So a Democrat was actually the deciding factor in advancing him forward to the full Senate for a full vote, where it's anticipated that he will be confirmed by the full Senate. So that's obviously been very interesting to see sort of the exchanges that he's had with senators on the Homeland Security Committee, and what will that all mean for the current DHS funding situation and the partial shutdown that DHS is currently in, which we know is obviously impacting the everyday American traveler, with TSA agents quitting and airports not being fully staffed, and seeing these horrific photos of security lines outside of airport entrances, hours long, wrapped around sidewalks. I mean, it's really crazy to see. I think David and Josh I know of at least got wrapped up in that TSA situation not too long ago, and so it's going to be interesting to see what happens when incoming Secretary Mullen, once he's confirmed, what that does to the funding situation, and if that helps alleviate the congressional gridlock where you've got two sides, the Republicans and Democrats, who are very dug in on their positions. And obviously there's a lot of politics surrounding ICE and a lot of different things that I guess what I'm saying is our industry and the money coming down from FEMA isn't the sticking point, right? There's broader political issues here, and other parts of DHS and other parts of the industry that we work in are kind of paying the price of that. And that can obviously be, frustrating, of course. We saw some big news come out last week on the EIPP, the eVTOL Integration Pilot Program. There was a provision included in the Drone Dominance Executive Order from last summer, standing up this program, which we'll talk about a little more later. It's a really big step in the right direction for the advanced air mobility industry, with a bunch of flights taking place, test flights taking place this summer across a variety of different things. Cargo, medical, logistics, autonomous flight, and a lot of really great companies whom I've worked with in the past and know very well are getting to participate in that pilot program, which I think will touch like 25, 26 states across the U.S., which will be really, really exciting to see. And there's a lot of data that will be gathered from that program that will help inform future regulation from the FAA when it comes to scaling advanced air mobility flights. We saw, in the last month to 2 months, a couple of, counter drone incidents in Texas, which have gotten a lot of eyes on them. A lot of folks have been reporting on them, and there's also been a lot of congressional oversight. We've seen a couple of different senators and members over in the House draft letters up to FAA and DoD and some of the agencies and DHS, wanting to learn more about the interagency coordination, sort of how that's all happening. I think with a focal point on this expanded counter-UAS authority to the states, and trying to better understand what the federal process looks like to avoid these types of incidents from happening, where in one case, we saw airspace over El Paso, Texas close down for a period of time, which is pretty rare, especially without, the appropriate communication of such an action ahead of time. So a lot happening around that. A lot of that information is classified, so a lot of it's not, available for public consumption. But it's good to see that the members of Congress who oversee these agencies are getting involved and, conducting oversight as they see fit. Last couple items that I've been closely tracking: the FAA recently mandated radar-based separation in congested airport airspace, which is sort of a direct result of the mid-air collision over DC and some of the NTSB recommendations that they issued in their findings. And we'll dig into that one a little bit more later on in the discussion, but it's a relatively big step, pushed in part from the families of those who unfortunately lost their lives in that mid-air collision. And then there's a lot of congressional activity on that topic as well, with some competing proposals and special interests getting involved. And so I've been keeping a close eye on sort of what's happening with the Rotor Act and the Alert Act and some other proposals that are floating around out there to help address, some critical safety issues that were brought to light following the mid-air collision. Lastly, there's obviously a lot of action happening on appropriations and NDAA for fiscal year 2027. A lot of offices have already started to open and close their deadlines for requests from folks in the industry. I'm personally working on a couple of different requests on both appropriations and NDAA that will support, more robust counter UAS industry, and will ultimately help, hopefully lots of companies in the space. And there's just a lot going on. There was a lot of momentum from last year from the NDAA being enacted into law and the expanded counter UAS authority. There continue to be congressional hearings. My former boss, Michael Robbins at UVSI, just testified before a committee in Congress yesterday on some PRC issues and sort of economic competitiveness and how we're stacking up to some adversarial nations with respect to autonomy, robotics, and uncrewed systems. So if you didn't catch that hearing, certainly go back and take a look at the recording. But that's high level. A lot of stuff happening in the first few months of this year, and a lot of momentum, going into Q2.
Okay. Thanks, Max. Look, that's our official policy corner or public affairs corner of the podcast, it seems. But man, good stuff, Michelle. I would love to hear.
I think there's a fundamental pragmatism that we have to all keep in mind with all of the things that have gone on just in the last year. There's been a lot of churn, a lot of learning, a lot of shifts in focus and prioritization. All of this is about airspace. That's the fundamental underpinning of all of this is flying in the airspace. And the FAA is the ultimate bottom line authority for our national airspace system. And they have gone through some pretty tremendous changes in this last year, not least of which is the deferred retirement program basically reduced their workforce, both at the executive level and at the subject matter expert level, significantly. So they have done something that I actually didn't anticipate, but I'm really, really proud of them and heartened. Brian Bedford basically got a requirement to do some restructuring, and then he went further and he reorganized the FAA into what I think is a very sensical orchestration now. So this new organization streamlined a lot of their diversity amongst the lines of business. I say diversity like they are all different things, but they were very connected in very similar functions across different lines of business. And they brought them all together, streamlined that process, and they've up-leveled some of the focus areas. That combination of things, I think, has made the FAA leaner and stronger. So that doesn't necessarily mean, everybody, that they have enough bandwidth to cover all the things in a minute either. There's still going to be processing delays. There are still going to be resource constraints, because what we're trying to do is an order of magnitude that I'm not sure is tenable by any manual processing. And right now they're trying to transition out of manual processing into more automated processing. So I implore everyone listening, please be patient. I know it's hard. I know it's a pain in the backside to have to wait for your approvals. The waiver process has come such a long way. That has not faltered. That's not going backwards. We're going to have new waivers, and there's going to be some churn around understanding what those mitigations need to be for those new waivers. That's just part of the process. But we need to give them some grace because they have so many things going on, trying to find that seam between the practicality of building out the brand new ATC system while we're also building out the low altitude operating environment that's massive. And we don't have unlimited budgeting. So I just wanted to put that, pragmatic point out there. With all these things that are going on, it all involves flying in the airspace, and we've got one FAA. So please be kind.
For sure. On that note of ATC modernization and low altitude airspace both being, addressed and updated at the same time, I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts. I've heard from a couple now, I'll say one or two locations, that they are getting access to FAA radar data for manned aircraft, as maybe part of like pilot programs or something that hopefully can then spread to other, non-federal. I'm talking like state agencies or even, I don't know exactly what kind of agencies these are, but anyways, I think the movement towards these drone corridors and low altitude groups being able to access that higher altitude FAA radar data is pretty fascinating. And then using low altitude radars to get from, to decongest those airspaces that are, very complicated, like Josh alluded to earlier, but also to like just get from the takeoff point up high enough to get into the larger, longer reaching, radars. I think is a pretty interesting combination, if that would be possible, if that's scalable. If you guys think, number one, that's a good idea or not, or what your opinion is, and then two, like if that will move beyond a pilot here, a pilot there, and maybe be more widespread. If pick a county, any city or county or locality in the U.S., if they want to try to recreate that, do you guys foresee that being part of the future, the combination of the modern ATC and UTM in the low altitude? What do you think?
I do. Max, you want to take a first shot at that, or you want me to go?
You can go first. Go ahead.
So I think we're taking the deliberate first steps in North Dakota to do that. So North Dakota has finally reached an agreement with the FAA to be able to receive radar data. And that's huge. They have put together the safety case for how they're going to protect the data. They have put together their use cases for how they plan to use the data to inform their research at the test site, at the university, at Grand Sky. And it's for both commercial and defense. So I think we've got the first step. Again, North Dakota, they're going to be a first again, which no one likes really being in that position. That's the worst position to be in, is first. But they're doing it again. And I am motivated by that. I have every confidence that there are going to be positives. There's going to be benefits that come out of that. I know, having been on the inside for so long, there is absolutely value to this. And how we characterize it and how we apply it are going to be the critical criteria for this being successful for low altitude operating environment uses. We keep using the term UTM, UAS traffic management, and I'm thinking we've already gone beyond that. I think we're now in, no kidding, low altitude operating environment, and that's how I'll continue to talk about it. UTM being a thing within it, but it's really a much broader discussion that has to happen, because we've got general aviation in here that we've got to be considering. We're talking about electronic conspicuity. This is going to be part of the data story. And that electronic conspicuity is going to be valuable to the general aviation population, right? They're going to want to be seen, and they're going to want to see these now smaller. They're not the smallest ones anymore. They're going to want to see these other smaller aircraft that are flying where they are in their operating area. So we're kind of solving an age-old problem of not being able to quantify VFR traffic ever. It's always been a challenge for us. But the introduction of drones and the low altitude operating environment technologies that are coming out of the woodwork now and getting significant levels of maturity are going to be able to address some of the legacy challenges we've had for a long time. the radar is going to be a good part of that. So I'm positive. I think this is a good thing. I want to see how it plays out. I want North Dakota to be the folks who lead that. They've got a lot of experience there. They have the regulatory thresholds on how far to be able to push and what the meaningful operational uses will be. So I want to see how that plays out. And then it's going to be up to all of us to figure out how to scale it. So I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I agree. The radar data, just general data sharing issue is one that I've done a lot of work on over the years. And, you know, the FAA is a very risk averse agency, and that it is exactly how it should be, right? And they frequently come to industry asking us for data and information, and the EIPP is a good example of that, right? It's a pilot program to help them gather and aggregate data, learn from it, and then make informed regulatory decisions in the future. And I think it's a very reasonable ask, a very reasonable request from folks in industry to want to be able to access certain data that the FAA is pulling together and aggregating to help inform industry's operations, industry's decisions, both tactical decisions, business decisions, and other things. And so that is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart, because I think there is a streamlined way for industry to access that data, and there are ways for the FAA to anonymize the data and strip it of any, sensitive information or personal information, and make it usable for folks in industry to make informed decisions. So I totally agree, and love that the folks up in North Dakota are kind of paving the way and showing how that can be a successful industry to government relationship where you exchange information, you exchange data, and you work together in a seamless fashion. But another thread I want to pull on that Michelle raised is this sort of broad encompassing term of electronic conspicuity, which we're seeing thrown around and used a lot. The FAA at the end of last year, and like the October timeframe, I think it was, they reopened the comment period for the BVLOS rulemaking. I might be mistaking my timeline, but it was sometime in the last few months. And I definitely, in my bingo card in 2026, did not have the FAA reopening the BVLOS rule on that bingo card. Like I was very surprised when it happened, pleasantly surprised, because they focused it around a couple of key topics that they wanted to hear more from industry about. And that was after several listening sessions that the FAA did. I mean, I have to give them a lot of credit, because when I was at my old job, they really made a good faith effort to try to bring everybody together. They even went so far as to hold a listening session where they brought folks from general aviation and traditional aviation and our community, put everybody in a room together, and was like, all right, guys, we're going to talk this out, and we're going to figure out a way to get to common ground. And I think those listening sessions that they did, they made a lot of progress. But clearly they felt like in the first round of comments that were due, in the middle of last year, they didn't get enough. They didn't get enough information or enough data from industry. So they said, okay, we're going to put out a reopening comment period. We're going to keep it open for 2 weeks, which, if anybody who has filed regulatory comments knows, 2 weeks is a very tight window. Usually it's 30 days or 60 days. So it's open for 2 weeks, and we want you to answer, these 7 questions. And they were almost all related to this broader idea of electronic conspicuity and what is needed for this very complex airspace, from the ground up to 400 feet and beyond. And I commend them for doing that and allowing industry to chime in on what they think is needed and what they think is necessary for this future where you have drones, advanced air mobility aircraft, general aviation aircraft, traditional aviation, passenger airliners, and other things flying around in the airspace all at the same time, which is going to be very complex and is going to require the highest possible levels of safety. And so, we at Echodyne have been talking to folks about ground-based detect and avoid, and how we can ensure we have this critical safety layer where you can see drones that might be dark. You can see general aviation aircraft that might not be equipped with an ADS-B transponder or another sort of technology. And you can also see any of those types of aircraft if they do have transponders, but they fail, or they don't work properly, or they're not turned on, or whatever the case may be. And so you've got these sort of very deeply entrenched, in some cases, political views on ADS-B equipage amongst the general aviation community, and then this expectation that the drone community be equipped always with some sort of transponder or remote ID or some sort of framework or some sort of technology where they are squawking on a radar, they're being seen on a radar, right? But there are instances in which that is not the case. And so this future of electronic conspicuity and what all it looks like and sort of the right-of-way part of the BVLOS rule, which has been a big sticking point in the rules evolution, is going to be incredibly important. And I applaud, like Michelle said, I applaud the FAA, who's, understaffed, under-resourced, overwhelmed with a lot of different things, for really listening to industry as they continue to promulgate the Part 108 BVLOS rule, which I think everybody hopes, a final rule will be out by the end of this year. I certainly am hopeful, cautiously optimistic, I would say, but we've come a long way, and we're on the precipice of a very complex, very crowded airspace of the future. But I'm confident in the FAA's ability as the regulator of the NAS, right? 1 inch off of the blade of grass in your backyard, that is federally regulated airspace. And I'm confident in their ability to manage all of this in, the safest and most effective way possible.
So let me touch on that for just a second. There's 2 things there. Number one, the FAA being able to normalize the data, protect the PII, and going back to what I said earlier, caution, patience, grace. Those of you that are in that field, that have that skill set out in industry, where you are managing big data, where you are using, you're getting into AI and you're processing large data amounts and you're using machine learning, please don't forget that the FAA wants to see what it is that you're building, because they've got these needs. And we can't expect them to create everything by themselves and just say, here, industry, here's a solution, knock yourself out. They really want the cutting edge, very technically sound, the things that you all do every day. They want to see it. So if you don't have a path, please connect with one of us so that we can help you make yourselves visible when you have something that could solve one of their data processing problems. They've got a multitude of different databases. Some of them are very mature and don't need any assistance. Others, not so much. So it's a bigger problem. The second thing, it totally escapes me. I went off and talked, and now I've forgotten what it was. So, David, I'll come back to it. I'm sure it'll come back to me later.
No problem.
Yeah, I think one thing, kind of talking about what the future looks like, especially with data sharing from, federal entities, local entities, with, the commercial space, people want to utilize these, new networks coming online for deconflicting the airspace. One thing we've been kind of running into, which is interesting, is we're seeing DFR taking off, even doing large scale BVLOS projects across different cities and things like that. But at the same time, a lot of those folks don't necessarily have the ability to sell that data. So if we're wanting to scale up these large networks, and especially utilizing existing networks of DFR or groups who have DFR or industry who's put out sensors, is there a way or creative ways that we can help police or DOTs get their data from being a shared resource for their federal or local partners to something that industry can utilize and start purchasing, or agreement that Amazon or Walmart can purchase that data as well?
Yeah, and to clarify, we'll talk to a DOT and say there's these 7 cities that have implemented sensors, radars, etc., and they're flying their drone in the box beyond visual line of sight in these pockets. And you're the DOT and you're looking at like funding this whole corridor, and check it out. There's like all these pockets already there. We could, just add one more setup and we can connect all of them. And then the challenge starts to become, who owns the equipment, who owns the data, who's allowed to share their data, who's not allowed to, do they, and they're trying to get creative in terms of being, a lot of them seem willing, I would say. And Josh, you can correct me if if I'm wrong about this in your area, but I'd say that a lot of the localities are like, yeah, we want to be part of this bigger setup, but maybe we have this local rule that if, we own it, we can't resell it, or or whatever the case, if they want to make money, if they don't want to make, anyways, thoughts on how do we progress in that way?
Yeah, guys, that's a challenging one, because it's going to come down to the state level, as Josh was saying, that it's the state DOTs really who have the positioning to be able to address how they're going to do these kinds of things statewide. And that's a challenge right now, because we still have some states, and Max, you said it already. If you are an inch off the grass, you are in the national airspace system that is owned and managed only by the Federal Aviation Administration. There is no other authority that can usurp that authority. And we still have some states who are unclear about how that works, and how do they have a say in what happens in their state if they don't have any authority over the airspace within, that covers their state. We've got rules about that. We've got policy about that. We've been doing it for a lot of years, but some of these states have not really been involved in it. So we've got to exercise grace and patience. And when we find those particular situations, even if you are a public safety and department within one of those states, and you hear that kind of confusion, it's up to you to help them see through it and recognize what their options are, even without having an authority over the airspace. You do have absolute authority over the ground. So there are certainly launch and landing policy that you can put in place. We see noise abatements all over the place. Noise can be visual as well. So it's up to all of us who have been here and doing this for a long time to help those folks, bring them along. Don't let them just continue to be frustrated, because it just slows progress.
Totally. What do you think in terms of the data sharing or sensor access to data from sensors that have been purchased by this entity, that entity, some state, county, municipal law enforcement, some are commercially owned, and how do we blend and get access without double purchasing any sort of technology? Josh, do you have something?
Yeah, and I think we've talked to some DOTs who've suggested that any technology they deploy, sensors to deploy, could be utilized by police or other state agencies. But when you start bringing in commercial entities like an eVTOL group, Amazon or Walmart wanting to do delivery, there's kind of a firewall between, state agencies can use this, but we can't then have commercial people using the same system. And there's a little bit of a firewall unless, the state, DOT decides that now we're allowed to sell data, which would be something they'd have to run through their state legislature. There seems to be, not every state's like that, but there seems to be some states where there's a little bit of a firewall between what the state agencies can use and then what commercial applications can then be layered on top of that.
Well, as it should be, right? We don't necessarily need everybody being able to see what public safety is looking at, right? That's impractical. That doesn't make any sense. However, if there are sensors that are peppered throughout a state, then there can be commercial service agreements that are very clear about what kind of data they're able to access and how they use it. Going back to the PII, that's super important. We can't just have sensors, surveilling 24/7 and then be able to use that indiscriminately for a number of different reasons. It's going to have to be very clear. And that's where the commercial services will need ROI, right, in order to continue to profit from these services that they're providing. So do I think it can be done? Yes, I do. I absolutely think it can be done. Is it going to be hard? Yeah, it is. and we're going to need to probably give a little bit on both sides. But yeah, I think it's doable, and I think it'll save us money in the long run.
Totally. Well, it's something Josh and I are trying to help, since we happen to know where some sensors are located in certain states, just try to figure out how to build some collaboration and allow various agencies to reuse, appropriate data instead of repurchasing when there's something already there, right? And it's just kind of to your point of interoperability and collaboration and all of that. It's at least something, and we'll navigate it, but just putting it out there as another topic of interest, right? And I'm sure it'll vary by state, by region, what their agreements are, et cetera. So it'll be a fun one to tease out this year. And we'll let you know.
Several episodes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how about FEMA funding for FAA? The FIFA World Cup. The phase 1 funding just getting released. I believe this week, from what I could tell, and I think equipment needs to be up and running early June, first week or two of June, I believe. So in June we got like 2.5 months, something like that. And so a little bit of tight turnaround there for industry, but still a pretty epic investment overall from the federal government through FEMA to help protect the airspace. In part, they allocated funding, as many of us have tracked, to help with the counter UAS, drone detection, drone mitigation, law enforcement, overtime pay for surrounding agencies to be able to join and help protect the games that are, of course, coming to the U.S. here in June. And I believe it's like 11 major cities here, and more in Canada and Mexico, a couple others. But with that, we've been waiting, right, for a couple months for the timing of that funding to be released and the ability then to get those, various products and things delivered and installed and up and running and, trained. And so it's going to be real interesting to see, just kind of how that plays out, especially the mitigation side as the ability to take drones down out of the sky. That technology gets widely deployed in all these cities and tested and tried. I'm curious to see how it goes. And of course, the deconfliction of all that is going to be really fascinating. So anyway, that's a topic. I've got, my personal kind of opinions and ideas in that, but I'll throw that out as like maybe a final topic to address here on the podcast. If you guys have any thoughts on that, if you're tracking that, if you, I don't know, opinions, thoughts for the wide world out there as that comes around the corner here.
Yeah, I can take that one. It's really exciting. This presents a big opportunity for the industry, but I think it presents, an equal number of challenges, right? And challenges are never a bad thing. They help the industry scale, they help the industry grow. And the World Cup, I think, will be the first major litmus test for this expanded counter UAS authority to SLTT entities and to see how it actually works, right? How well trained are the state, local, tribal, territorial officials that are using this technology? What role will the feds play in oversight, right? How will the state folks and the federal folks communicate with each other? How will all of that work? And, I think the World Cup it's certainly it's a massive event, right? Like I think we've heard on a couple of occasions that there are, hundreds and hundreds, well over 500, 600 security, safety critical sites at the World Cup, including the matches and the stadiums, of course, as the focal point. But the hotels, the fan parties, the ride sharing locations, those are all sites that need to be effectively patrolled and effectively policed and need to be as safe as possible throughout the duration of the World Cup matches. So I was super excited to see that the funding was finally released this week. Obviously, like I mentioned before, the DHS partial shutdown, I think in part or possibly in full, caused that delay, just given shifts in resources and folks being furloughed. And obviously FEMA falls within the Department of Homeland Security, and so you've got this broad spectrum of things that are being impacted by that partial shutdown, all the way from your TSA lines to, this World Cup funding flowing down to the states. But, we did see some states, and have heard that some states have made purchase orders before they actually got their money, which is obviously, positive news and positive reinforcement, and that training down in Huntsville has begun, and, folks are understanding how to use this technology and understanding how it works. And, I agree with you, David. We do have a pretty tight timeline. Beginning of June is right around the corner here. And, through my conversations with folks at the federal level and folks at the state level, I think folks are really excited about the challenge that this presents, and, showing us that with the right technology, with the right capability, with the right training, with the right coordination, that this can be done, safely and securely. And, there's tons of companies out there who make great technology. And for those listening, I would implore you to get in touch with the folks at the federal level across, FAA, DOT, DOJ, FBI, all DOD, all the different agencies that sort of oversee this very complex counter UAS issue, and make sure your voices are heard. Make sure they know who you are, make sure they know about your technology, see if there are any opportunities to test your technology for them, or do a demonstration of your technology for them, so they can actually see it and touch it and hold it and feel it, and understand how it works. I mean, that's the best way to really get squarely on the map of these folks who, in the future, as part of the Safer Skies Act, will be creating this approved equipment list of certain technologies that they have vetted as capable, affordable, and are able to do the job. And through my conversations with, folks at the federal level, they're doing a lot of due diligence into technologies as they're creating that list, because they want to make sure that whatever entity is buying technology, that they're buying, American or allied technology that is sourced the right way, is proven, is capable, has a long track record of success. So definitely encourage folks to reach out if you haven't already.
Yeah, we're talking mostly about the public safety aspects, the security aspects of the World Cup. And I agree 1,000,000% that this is the blueprint for the future SLTT authorities. We're showing this is our proving ground for how this is going to work. And of course, with anything, it's not going to be perfect. And with all the funding that we are getting, we're doing a lot of good things. There's a lot of goodness that's happening here. And there's going to be some obvious things that we're not able to get after. I know one that bothers me is the lack of proliferation of the Teams Awareness Kit as the backbone for these public safety agencies to share situational awareness with one another. So, like Max says, there's going to be hundreds of these sites. I heard something like, what, Max, 600 with all of the parties and everything. That's a stress. That's a massive stressor on our public safety community. The least we can do is give them open source capabilities that allow them to be able to have situational awareness across all of their teams. It is open source. It is available right now, but unfortunately, it's not part of an acquisition system. So it kind of misses out on the funding opportunities that come from FEMA and for the counter UAS stuff. It's more of the back end, but it's so important. It's a frustration that I hope we can kind of log as a lesson learned for when we are looking at SLTT authorities, and it becomes a consideration, more of a given than something that we've forgotten.
Yeah, to your point with the hack, like the ability to have this single pane of glass where an air boss can drop in and see everything going on, all the movements, that is going to be really essential. I know that GB Jones, in an interview we did with him, was really emphasizing that aspect of not just counter UAS capability, but that ability to have awareness of all things in the airspace, whether counter or positive, media drones, law enforcement drones, what should and shouldn't be there, and some sort of access to that in a manageable way. And where sounded like the FIFA team was helping in terms of coordination, in terms of like collecting what the whitelisted remote IDs would be from those various entities that have submitted for waivers to fly during the games. Like they're helping collect and coordinate, but then in terms of who actually uploads those lists into a database, into a software, that piece needs to still be solved. And, perhaps in some cities has been solved, via the funding and the quotes that went out from folks. Cause we don't, I'm not part of that direct piece of the puzzle, but it seemed like there was a gap there from light conversations I've had with some of the folks that sell that kind of software, in that, maybe a little bit of a disconnect and maybe opportunity for folks out there who offer that almost UTM in a way, but I know, Michelle, I got to learn your new phrase for it, but just whoever has that overlay that can bring in the good and the bad, the compliant, the non-compliant, the counter UAS, and the positive, use of drones into one space, and like who's allowed to be there, who's not. Let's flag that. Like, oh, that's a blue one, that's good, that's law enforcement. That's a white drone, that's media, and then this one's flashing red. Maybe now only radar's picking it up, and man, that's a serious concern. That's hovering, nearby, and it's coming towards the stadium. That sort of ability, we're going to be pressure tested whether or not that capability has come together in a given jurisdiction, I think. But still, opportunity though. And to Josh's point, it was a positive push on the industry, being FIFA World Cup and FEMA funding to back that up, and we're really celebrating that fact that like, it wasn't a quote unquote 9/11 event that was necessary. And I've heard people say things like that, like, it's like, we got to be woken up, I guess, as an industry, and hopefully it's not going to take that. And we're super thankful that it's like, no, it didn't. Like it took a positive, moment in history, an economic driver, something that we get to celebrate and team up on and have funded because of, economic growth, and celebrating a passion around, this sport, and bringing in other communities and cultures. That's what's actually driving the UAS industry and the counter UAS industry in America, up through this summer, to get funded and to test all this new equipment and everything, is a positive thing. So as Max said, the challenge is positive.
It's all unprecedented. We haven't had this mix of aviation and large event at this scale ever before. So the funding streams are we're trying to do patchwork right now. Like we'll take FIFA, for example. They've got a very strong security arm that GB oversees. They have 2 airspace people, and we're introducing drones and counter UAS. That's a stressor. That's way more. There's a lot. There are many more layers that they've yet to experience, that I hope will be a lesson learned for them for the next time. And they have grown that team, because we can't keep pulling those people in a million different directions.
Well, it's good. Well, hey, we got only a couple minutes left. It looks like we were able to banter for an hour on just the updates, not even deep diving into the topics yet. So I really appreciate you guys. Was there anything else top of mind that you guys want to throw out there before we kind of call it a week, and then just announce to everybody that we're going to continue this every week, and we're going to have more guests on. So please reach out to us, send us a note, send us like a person that in the industry that could really help bring benefit, not just like a product pitch, but more of an insight on something that we could have on an upcoming episode. We're open to it. And otherwise, yeah, but back to the comment. Does anybody want to close out with any final thoughts for the industry, or things that we missed today that we just want to put on the table as things we could deep dive later? Or do we kind of sum it up?
I think we did really well. I think there's probably more, and multiple layers down that we could and should be hitting on. I'm hoping that the folks that are listening recognize that we want to do this in a meaningful way. So positivity, be considered and professional. That's what we're all about here, to bring you something that's useful, something that's meaningful you can action.
Yeah, I think I'll just close and say, I really do think that the ball right now is in our court, and I think that presents a ton of opportunity. You know, we've been asking the federal government for a long time to do certain things, right? We want you to promulgate the BVLOS rule. We want you to expand counter UAS authorities. We want DoD to buy more drones. We want, FAA to modernize the air traffic control system. We want, all these different things. And a lot of those things have happened, right? A lot of those investments have been made. A lot of that progress on the rulemaking has been made. A lot of money flowed down to the industry as part of the one big beautiful bill, the budget reconciliation bill over the summer last year. And so now I think is our time to shine as industry, to solidify that the federal folks made the right decisions in investing this money and making these statutory changes and making these policy changes and standing up the eVTOL integration pilot program and all these different things. Right now is our time to show that the technology is there, the capability is there, our ability to work with the federal government is there, our ability to work with members of Congress is there. And so it's really exciting what's happening. And I mentioned, DoD buying more drones. One topic we didn't even talk about is the drone dominance initiative that the DoD undertook. And, they're going to be investing over $1 billion into the drone industry throughout this calendar year through a series of different gauntlets that they're calling them and making these purchase orders. And so there's this direct infusion of capital into the industry that is happening through the counter UAS grant program, through the drone dominance initiative, through ATC modernization, through all the pilot, all these different things. And now I think is our opportunity to really come together, work together, lift each other up, and show the federal government that the drone and AAM industries aren't nascent industries anymore, right? We're maturing, we're advancing, we're iterating, we're revolutionizing the way that people can do things and use certain tools for higher levels of safety and higher levels of responsibility that comes along with that. So I'm really optimistic about the future. I know others across the industry are as well. So, I encourage everybody to let their walls down, let their guards down, work together, and create a better and stronger, more prosperous industry for everyone.
Wonderful. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening in, and we've got some exciting ones coming up, and can't wait to engage. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Josh. We'll see you all next time around.
Thank you.